Easy. I'm Garrett Peck, and I'm the author of the book The Prohibition Hangover, Alcohol in America from Demon Rum to Cult Cabernet. This is a book that I started around Christmas 2003, so 6 years ago, and I've been working at it steadily since. I actually had like an epiphany moment at my grandmother's house at Christmas. I brought a bottle of wine and opened it. I was there with my grandmother and my mom and myself, so three of us, and my grandmother got just a little bit snooty about the fact that I brought this bottle of wine, and we're a Protestant family, and like the light bulb went on at that moment. I thought, wow, this is kind of funny. This is a generational value that wasn't passed on to my mom or to myself. The two of us are both social drinkers, right? But my grandmother, who was born in 1913, was part of that generation that stigmatized alcohol, and she was raised, I think, with alcohol being a bad thing, and so therefore, if you did drink, you kind of drink under the table. You don't tell anyone, right? It's different from for like Catholic families and so on. But you know, if you come from a Protestant background, you know, the Protestants were the ones who gave us Prohibition. So yeah, that was like the epiphany moment. And I thought, wow, I need to go explore this question. This is something that's been really uncharted, and that's where I found myself exploring through the book, really what happened to Americans and alcohol after repeal, and how we went from a country where we once stigmatized alcohol to where we are 76 years now, 76 years later, where alcohol is just more and more of a normal consumer product. I did all the above. I wrote it as a journalist, and so I interviewed several hundred people for the book itself, and really wanted to be very balanced in my treatment of the book. Yes, in fact, I am a social drinker. I do drink. But that said, there are many people who don't drink and have different viewpoints about alcohol, and I think those people have to be incorporated into the grand picture as well, because their viewpoint is valid as well, certainly, right? So I interviewed people from for pastors, from all kinds of different churches, experts in the alcoholic beverage industry, people who work in tourism areas, people who work on bottling lines, industry experts, and thanks. And yeah, interviewed quite a number of people here for the book itself. So I also, of course, looked also at the historical record. So looked at what had been written in the past. And the last really significant book that was written about Americans and alcohol was written in 1979. That was called The Alcoholic Republic by William Rorabaugh. He's a professor at the University of Washington. And really no one's covered at all what happened to Americans and alcohol after repeal. His book covered how the temperance movement really got started in the early 1800s. Discovering how important bourbon is to America. I didn't really know anything at all about bourbon. I mean, I tried it as a kid, I guess, or in high school, when you're not supposed to be drinking this stuff. But I needed to kind of flesh out the distilled spirits chapter, and contacted one of my friends who works for a major distilled spirits company, and he said, oh, you need to go to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So we set up a bunch of interviews and a bunch of tours, and we went out there and just fell in love with the area. And I learned so much going out there, interviewing a couple of different master distillers, and finding out about how they make bourbon, and actually getting to taste it, even fresh out of the barrel. That was really cool. So I have to say that's actually my favorite chapter of the book now. So the chapter is called Whiskey and Rye. The subtitle, Alcohol in America from Demon Rum to Cult Cabernet, was intended to give sort of a sense of the transition, how we moved away from demonizing alcohol drinking. Hence, Demon Rum was once what the temperance movement called alcohol. They also called it John Barleycorn. They equated it with Satan. It literally was something that's satanic, right? A tool of the devil, hence Demon Rum, right? And along with that came the stigma against drinking alcohol. Fast forward 76 years, and you have people like Miles in Sideways, the movie Sideways, who is a fanatic about Pinot Noir growing on these tiny little vineyards, right? You also have people who are fanatics about Cult Cabernet, hence the other subtitle, part of the subtitle of the book, or people who are crazy about single malt scotches or 90-minute IPAs and so on. People are much more aware now about what they drink, and I think overall Americans are actually drinking less, but they're drinking more and more for quality. And I think that comes along in part because of the foodie movement, which comes in part from Julia Child, right? Who got Americans to start thinking about, how do you make something good out of fresh ingredients, and oh, by the way, you can pair that with a really nice wine, you know. And then people started discovering, yeah, you can also do it with beer and spirits as well, right? So there's this whole foodie phenomenon, not just in the kitchen, but also at the bar. I'd say if there's any lingering stigma left in the country towards alcohol, and there's very, very little stigma left, but if you do find it, it's going to be in the Deep South, generally in rural counties where Southern Baptists predominate. And that's where there's still a bit of a stigma against drinking in general. But overall, by the way, 2/3 of American adults drink alcohol now, so drinkers are an absolute majority now within the country. What I found was actually more interesting to see kind of the generational shift between alcohol. It's very, very cyclical, what we drink. What one generation drinks is different from the next generation. For example, bourbon and rye whiskey were very, very popular after World War II. And then along came the 1970s, and it just hit the wall. The baby boomers came up, and they didn't want to drink anything with the name old in front of it. So no Old Crow, no Old Forester, Old Granddad. They were like, we're young people. We don't drink anything that's old, right? And yeah, that became a big problem for the bourbon industry, and it almost collapsed in the 1970s, just because you had an intergenerational conflict, right? The next generation, the baby boom, came up, and their rise coincided with the craft beer movement, and also with craft wine. So they shifted over. Baby boomers today drink wine. That's really what they drink. I'm a Generation Xer. We kind of drink everything, but beer seems to be kind of our predominant thing. And you look at the millennials coming up now, and they're choosing spirits. Yeah, corn juice. Right?
Yeah.
It's interesting to see. Vodka is definitely the king for distilled spirits. I think it's about 1/3 of what Americans actually drink, spirits-wise, is vodka. And people certainly drink that at different generations, but if you go out to bars right now, look at the young people, and they're drinking vodka, right? Because it doesn't taste like anything. It's a great starter thing, because it doesn't have any flavor, it doesn't bite. The brown spirit thing, I think, comes a little bit later on. You earn an appreciation for it, just like you also earn an appreciation as you get older for fine wine or for craft beer. It's something you develop a taste for it. So like enjoying, you know, as opposed to taking a shot of something, instead of actually, you know, pouring a serving of good scotch or good bourbon whiskey and sipping it over a course of an hour, you know. That's something I think you come to a little bit later on in your life, in your late 20s or your early 30s, once your attitudes about alcohol change a little bit, when you're not necessarily drinking anymore to get drunk, but rather drinking for the experience or drinking for the good taste of it, you know, or the way it pairs along with a meal. So yeah, so people change their drinking habits throughout their lives.